like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms or euphemistic language. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. I'll give you an example of that. There's a condition in combat when a fighting person's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute peak and maximum, can't take any more input. The nervous system has either snapped or is about to snap. In the First World War, that condition was called shell shock. Simple, honest, direct language, 2 syllables, shell shock. And the Second World War came along, and the very same combat condition was called battle fatigue. Fatigue is a nicer word than shock. Then, of course, came the war in Vietnam. The very same condition was called post-traumatic stress disorder. And the pain is completely buried under jargon. I'll bet you if we'd have still been calling it shell shock, some of those Vietnam veterans might have gotten the attention they needed at the time. I'll bet you.
Coward! Me 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 coward!
Hello, fellow casualties of Trump's war on America. I am your patriotic, woke, imperialist host, Lenny Thompson.
And I'm Ralph Wigglesworth, your conservative hero, a battle-hardened veteran of the meme wars, and aspirational cannon fodder for my personal Holy Roman Emperor, President Donald Trump.
Today's show is about mental health and state violence. And sorry, Ralph, but I don't mean the tyranny of mask mandates in California. No, I'm talking about the big enchilada, the big state, the United States. Recent years have seen a bipartisan effort to promote mental health treatment among veterans and law enforcement. But as the stigma of post-traumatic stress disorder recedes, some say we ought to consider the secondary role therapists might play in maintaining state violence.
Thank you, Lenny. Now, I've been saying this for years. We need more civilians to be implicated in U.S. war crimes. It's like a firing squad. Everyone shoots, so no one is the executioner. Imperialism is a team sport.
That's not what I meant, and you know it's not what I meant. Thankfully, we have a guest today who can set Ralph straight. Colette Shade is a writer and therapist whose work has appeared in Jacobin, The New Republic, Gawker, and more. We will be discussing her recent article for the Baffler magazine called Treating American Empire right after this quick break. You're listening to Debate Me Coward.
I'm just saying you should have served. I don't know why you didn't serve.
Welcome back to Debate Me Coward. Joining us now is Colette Shade to discuss her recent article, Treating American Empire for the Baffler magazine. Thank you for coming on, Colette.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Colette. Now, I would have to admit, I was a little worried about having you on because I saw that you were recently referred to as the anti-Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. Some people have called me that, one or maybe two.
So I'm a little worried because, as longtime listeners know, I'm actually a fellow at the Jordan Peterson Institute for Petulant White Men. So I just want to say that I know the man well. And if you're the anti-Jordan Peterson, does this mean that you're like subsisting on a diet of just tofu and seaweed and you're secretly dying of scurvy somewhere?
You know, I'm not a doctor, not a nutritionist, but from what I've read,
he has that on you, right?
Yeah. I think it's generally best to eat a nutritionally balanced diet in general.
No, I think if beef and salt is doing it for you, I think that's good, which it was doing for him for a very long time. But then COVID caught him and it's not now doing so well. We wish you all the best, Jordan. Now,
I don't.
What? No, I think we do. As a part of the show, we wish him all of the best. Now, Colette, I want to dive into your article a little bit. It begins with you spoiling the ending of Bad Boys for Life, the third of the Bad Boys franchise, where after, I'm going to spoil it now for my listeners, so if you haven't seen it, hit pause, and then pay $20 to rent it, watch it, and then come back. Now, at the end of the film, They have murdered several cartel members inside of a Mexican mansion. They've shot a woman in the chest, and then they shot a helicopter and caused it to explode, killing everyone on board. And then it wraps up, and then you see the bad boys celebrating over cake and cocktails. Officer Dorn comes in, and then he ruins the festivities by suggesting that everyone goes to therapy. I assume in January, when this is in theaters, everyone let out a groan of like, what? Because here's my question. Why would they need therapy? They're happy, they're smiling, they're being social. I mean, it makes sense to me because when I get depressed, I just eat funfetti. Seems like if they're feeling sad, that's what they're doing now. Why would the bad boys need therapy, Colette?
Well, I think the bad boys would need therapy because they've just been through a number of extremely traumatic events. They've had to shoot people. They've had to be in extremely risky and dangerous situations where their lives were in danger. They've been in a number of car chases. And this is just not, I think people are just not really evolved to deal with that, I think, in a healthy way.
So we're not meant to be bad boys.
Yeah, I would say we're not meant to be bad boys. Yeah.
That was one of Jesus's commandments, I think. Like one of his parables is basically that's what it amounts to. Don't be a bad boy.
I think what he said was, if you have to be a bad boy, you got to be a bad boy.
Yeah, I'm not a Christian though. But you do right though that, and I want to just preface this by saying that the P is a P word in this quote, and it's not me. I'm not the one saying it. The observation that soldiers are traumatized by battle predates even the invention of modern warfare. However ancient its roots may be, it was until recently believed by many soldiers that PTSD was for pussies. But for some veterans, particularly those who don't actually suffer from PTSD, therapy is now understood as a kind of badge of honor. It means you are man enough to really see some shit. So my question, Colette, is how and why do you think this kind of toxically masculine view of what therapy is changed? What happened there?
Well, I think that's a difficult question. I think that therapy in general has entered the sort of mainstream discourse, and a lot of the stigma around it has kind of fallen away. But also, as I talk about in the article, there were explicit campaigns by government agencies dealing with veterans, by agencies dealing with police officers to try to actually get people in these professions into therapy because they had very, very high rates of suicide, very high rates of domestic violence, substance abuse, all sorts of other really terrible problems. And
right.
So there really were these concerted efforts. Now, it's not clear if this change was a result of these efforts mostly, or if it was part of a broader cultural change, but there seems to have been some kind of a change.
Yeah, it could just be that war is more traumatic now. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I know is that in general, the medicine is good enough and advanced enough so that people who previously would have died in battle in really horrific ways are actually able to be saved. And then, they come back, but they've survived something just horrific with people that they worked with who were killed. They're missing limbs or have just really, really severe injuries. And, I think it almost doesn't have to be said that that's traumatic.
Yeah. Well, Ralph always says that, drones save lives. He always tells me that.
That's true. I do say that. I say carpal tunnel. Is that big of a deal?
What does it have to do with drones?
Because if you're running the drone, if you're in Las Vegas running the drones, I don't need to explain myself here. But this is relatively a new phenomenon because PTSD, just for our dumber listeners, post-traumatic stress syndrome, wasn't a thing until 1980, right? But in World War I, you had shell shock. I don't need to get into the old George Carlin bit.
Right.
Are you familiar with this bit where...
I'm not. Tell me.
World War I, you have shell shock, and then World War II, it starts to become battle fatigue. Mm-hmm. And then eventually it gets to post-traumatic stress syndrome, where, his point is you have these euphemisms that start to obscure more and more what the issue is and how serious it is. And so really, when PTSD starts, when you were talking about in the article in 1980, they started looking back at Vietnam veterans and start looking at the trauma that they experienced there. I think from what you were saying of like the medicine was starting to get better. So then you have these guys who may have died on the battlefield are coming back, but yet they have are having more mental traumas that now they have to deal with. And in the article, you cite that in 2016, 13.5% and 30% of Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans, respectively, screened positive for PTSD. Does that seem like a lot? That seems like a big number.
I mean, it seems really high. That's not good.
Right.
That is not good. But do they know that we took out Saddam? Have therapists tried more like explaining the war in a simpler term of like, yeah, but you helped us get rid of Saddam? And also there's Dunkin' Donuts in Iraq now. I think that's a positive we can all agree on.
Yeah, I mean, perspective taking is definitely something that certain therapists use in certain contexts.
Yeah, I think that's a charitable way to describe Ralph's thoughts there. But yeah, it does seem quite high, and there has been, you're right, a more concerted effort lately by both parties. People say that Democrats and Republicans can't get along. Well, they got along on something, and that was the 2017 Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act. Tell us about that. What does that do?
So the 2017 Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act told the Department of Justice to report on mental health practices used by the VA, the Veterans Administration, that could be adapted for police officers who also have similarly high rates of PTSD, substance abuse, a lot of these other issues. And it allocated grant funds toward establishing peer mentoring mental health and wellness pilot programs at a state, local, and tribal law enforcement level.
So the peer mentoring, there are other cops that are mentoring them, or are there therapists that are mentoring them?
It would be other cops. Peer mentoring would be your peers.
But are they trained? I'm just curious about like where who is training them? Are these just cops being like, here's what I do to feel better about these things and what you like rookie cops can try?
That's a very good question. And I don't know. I didn't look into that super, super closely. I was just doing an overall look of what these sort of efforts were on this issue.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the footage that I had seen, at least, from the beginning of a lot of the protest in the anarchist jurisdictions. I don't know if you've seen
Where are
this.
the anarchist jurisdictions, Ralph?
Most major cities.
Oh, okay.
But Portland being the major center, and I think Seattle, New York City, the city that you are in, Lenny, is being taken over by anarchists.
Oh, okay.
But if you see the footage of police in the beginning of this,
but all right.
They have their nightsticks out. They're really wailing on kids. They're pushing their cars through. It seems like they are in a stressful situation, but also able to relieve their stress at the same time.
So you're saying that driving through a crowd of protesters could be a stress reliever?
Maybe. I'm just throwing this out there. If it works for the police, isn't it something that we should support? Any type of stress reliever.
I would say no, because it results.
As a therapist,
I would say no because it results in the deaths and injuries of many, many people, and we're mandated reporters. And if somebody is threatening to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, we've got to report it.
Well, just to look at the facts, most of those kids got out of the way.
Well, okay,
Intent.
but they could.
It's an issue of intent.
Yes. And, we did have a guest on recently who talked about the military's esports team and some of their recruitment practices on Twitch. So I wonder if, esports, Call of Duty, although I guess Call of Duty might be a little traumatic for some, triggering, they might say, for some veterans. So maybe not that idea.
Well, this is a good question, too, is that used as a way for veterans to be able to revisit experiences? Would that be a therapeutic use to use Call of Duty in these games to make them, revisit
God.
trauma?
No, I mean,
I'm not a therapist. Throwing it out there.
I haven't trained in, sort of trauma specific therapy, but my gut instinct just as a human being is that no, that would probably not be great.
If they don't like video games, that's your gut instinct, is that veterans don't like video games?
Just that I don't.
I would try it. I think they love Twitch, and I would, yeah.
All right. Well, let's move off video games for a second. Go back to violent films, because you mentioned the shoot and cry genre of film in the article, and I was wondering if you could just tell our listeners what that is.
So the shoot and cry genre of films is basically a category of films that follows a veteran or group of veterans who, well, starts with, before they're veterans, follows a soldier, a group of soldiers as they go into battle, and then they come home, and then they deal with the psychological and social fallout of their experiences. And, sometimes it shows them like going to therapy or having kind of heart-to-hearts with their buddies or their family members or their partners. And it was actually coined in Israel, and a lot of Israeli dramas fall into this category, but it exists in the US as well.
Do you think that's because they have conscription? You have to serve in the Israeli Defense Force?
Yeah,
that would make me cry.
I do think that. Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it.
So are these movies made to like make people be like, oh, I should support the troops more because now this makes me feel sad for veterans?
I think it's difficult to say. I think the experience of being a veteran is a legitimate one in terms of being a subject for art, just like any experience is legitimate in terms of being a subject for art. But I just think that this sort of category as a whole, rather than certain of these films individually, I think this category as a whole kind of serves to just say, well, war is just this terrible thing that has to happen, and people sacrifice themselves to fight the fight. And that's just how it is. But it doesn't really get at the question of, okay, well, why are these wars happening in the first place? And do they have to happen? It's too focused on the individual.
Gotcha. And it's certainly a little farther from like Rambo, which is a movie about how like we would have probably won Vietnam War if Rambo was there. Because
right.
He was not, we lost. Yeah. There's a lot of movies. Like Chuck Norris, I think, was also in a lot of movies. That's a whole other genre of we would have actually won Vietnam if this guy was there.
Yeah, I think there's also, isn't there one of the Rocky movies that's dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan?
I don't know, but that sounds really intriguing to me.
No, I'm pretty sure that exists.
Yeah. This is what we say on the show. It always matters of where you start the tape or where you end the tape. So with that, they were very brave until about 1988. Okay. Then they're off the books.
Well, you in the article, just to go back to your article, you did have an analogy that I found quite interesting. You write, imagine if American therapists were deployed to the Yemeni wedding targeted by an airstrike in 2018 to help surviving guests process the drone bombing. And I gotta say, I'm imagining it, Colette, and it sounds like a great idea. Because why didn't Barack Obama do this when he was bombing the shit out of Yemen for all those years? Joe Biden, if you're listening, I think you gotta get on this. Because, really, isn't the problem itself not the bombing, but that we have this callous president who doesn't even try to hide our brutal foreign escapades?
Why do you think that he didn't send therapists there?
Because he wasn't ahead of the curve. I think that's what it is. Like, that's a master and PR, which it's an industry I used to work in. We call that a master stroke. You're kind of inoculating the audience against thinking that you did wrong. And I think Barack Obama just wasn't there. I just don't think he's quite as strategic as I hope Joe Biden will be. But that's just me. I don't have Biden's ear. Although we do have a friend on the show who is kind of close to the Biden campaign. So I might run that up the flagpole.
For people who didn't read the article, what I said in the article was basically that there was this terrible bombing of a Yemeni wedding that killed a lot of civilians in 2018. And the sort of overarching logic of helping people process the imperial state is, okay, well, it has to exist and it's going to traumatize people, whether they're in other countries or, civilians here, or whether they're police officers or whether they're soldiers. It just has to happen. All of this stuff has to happen. And we'll just sort of clean up after the fact. We'll just, make sure everyone's feeling okay.
So I just want to be real clear about the facts here. 2018, I'm sure that this was actually probably more of John Bolton's idea than it was the president, and that he is innocent of this decision. But also, I think we're getting to the crux of what your piece was all about, Colette, which is that there is inherent violence that is just accepted as a part of, the American structure, and that we can try to ease with therapy some of like people that have to commit this violence, i.e. police and veterans. And I mean, even beyond that, there is all kinds of like violence and a lot of things of anxiety that are built into America as it is now. And I believe you're pushing therapists to widen the scope, and that just curing individuals of this issue isn't going to end this PTSD among veterans is obviously going to keep increasing as American wars become more and more abstract and put soldiers in situations that like become more and more confusing of what the reasonings are. Is this correct?
Yeah, no, it's correct. You really can't. Anytime there's a public health crisis, and I'm going to go into public health mode now, but anytime there's a public health crisis, you have to get at the root cause. Like if you see a trend, so a rising, more and more people having a certain problem or diagnosis, it's usually not just happening at random. Usually there's a cause that goes beyond the individual. And so there's a public health term called social determinants of health that basically talks about this and says that, if you see a huge spike, say in asthma in poor Black neighborhoods, it's not just because Black people happen to have asthma more, it's because of something else. And the something else about that in particular, which is pretty heavily studied, is that in poor Black neighborhoods, that's where we tend to put highways and toxic waste plants and chemical refineries and other very dangerous and polluting types of things. And so people in those neighborhoods get sick. And so a social determinants of health approach, instead of saying, not instead, but, it says, okay, well, people need treatment, but like the issue isn't, let's make sure everyone has an asthma inhaler. The issue is, why is there a toxic waste dump in this neighborhood?
Well, I think the issue is, why did they build their neighborhood by the highways? Because
their neighborhood was probably there first.
Well, then it's time to move. If you have a highway that's been built there, then it's perfect time to move. The housing market is looking great.
It's always the victim's fault. Ralph Wiggles.
Well, I just wanted to point out that, Colette, what I was setting you up for, this is a bit of a gotcha, because that right there is why you are an anti-Jordan Peterson. Because Jordan Peterson would say it's all the individual. We have our own responsibility, and outside cultural effects are not any of our concern, that it's because we're not standing up for ourselves enough. This is something that brave man, may he rest in peace, I've said too much, in Serbia, where he's currently hiding out.
What if it's a mix of the two?
Go on. But I will let you know, before you say any more, that Lenny and I are not allowed to agree. So if you convince us that it is a mix and both parties are responsible, we could lose this whole show.
Yeah, what if both things are true at the same time?
Then my mind is truly blown.
Yeah, my brain is just broken right now. It's too abstract to think that we could both be wrong.
You can expand on that if you'd like, Colette.
Yeah, you can both be wrong, and you can come together in your wrongness.
As long as we're both being paid by Permanent Revolution Podcast Network.
Look, Ralph is constantly talking to me about how he's a lobster and I'm a cuttlefish.
Right, that's correct. On the scale of
Jordan Peterson taxonomy of, what did you call it?
Scale of self-ownership. Yes, of how much you are, yes.
Yes, anyway.
But so, one thing also I wanted to bring up is that, you're talking about expanding therapy, right? That there's a lot of, I forget what you said in the article, but like there's a lot of like secondary exposure to violence.
Oh, yeah. That's a big problem. So if you watch a video of someone being killed by a police officer,
Bad Boys for Life, for example.
Right. Yes. But I think it's probably worse I think it's almost certainly worse if it's an actual human being, a real person, not a fictional character.
You're talking about Rotten.com, that type of thing?
I don't know what that is.
It's a liveleak.com. That's another one. It's where you can just watch violence on the internet.
Yeah, that's not great. That's really not good for anybody.
Listeners, do not go there.
Well, but you don't have to go anywhere. That's her point, right? I mean, you see these videos proliferate all through the news
Right.
media.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, these, if somebody gets killed by police and it becomes a major news story, I'll see this posted 20 times in 12 hours.
Mhm.
And I typically, personally, I don't watch those videos just because I know what is happening, and I don't feel the need to traumatize myself by seeing it happen.
Yeah. I see a lot of liberals when they post this video, they do a thing called, you'll post like a trigger warning. Do you think that helps? If I share a video on Facebook of someone being shot by the police and I go, trigger warning, guy getting shot by the police, and this post on Facebook, am I helping?
I guess at least that's a warning telling people what's in there. But I think in general, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about sharing these videos, and I'm not entirely sure if it's my place to say whether sharing them is good or bad, because on the one hand, sharing them has created a mass movement, or at least has contributed to a mass movement of people standing up to the kind of practices that caused those videos to begin with. But on the other hand, you've got, people just watching this sort of theater of violence and barbarity.
For sure. And I don't know how much a trigger warning will do if it's like a thumbnail of the footage. When you share a Facebook link, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I already did it. Hope it's fine.
The trigger apology.
The cool thing about Facebook is that the video has already started.
Right. And autoplay. So you just have to watch this terrible thing.
Well, so where I hang out online, where I see a lot of my violence, is the QAnon boards. And so at the QAnon boards, you got to share really graphic things so that you can get people on your side to really radicalize them. Is it better to use it as a political motivator? Because I know, so like QAnon boards, we have this thing called the Frazzle drip video.
Oh, God.
Now, this is, not sure if you're familiar with this.
I'm not familiar. Tell me.
Well, you're about to be a Q fan. What it is a video that was on Anthony Weiner's hard drive. And it is a video of Hillary Clinton and Anthony Weiner's wife, whose name escapes me right now. Yes. So it's the two of them, and they're out there with a surgeon, and they remove the skin off of a young girl's face, and they put it on Hillary Clinton. I'm not making this up. This is real.
He is making it up. I mean, people actually believe it, but it's not real.
It is real. And so Hillary Clinton puts the face of the girl on and then dances around the room. Now, this is obviously a gross, terrible video. No one has the video. It has never leaked. It's just a story of the video. But in the QAnon boards, we share this horrible thing so that people will find it and be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Donald Trump must be the savior who's going to call out all the deep state pedophiles. Is that not a good use of sharing violence online?
I would say that that's not a good use of sharing violence online.
But I'm radicalizing people into Q.
I would say that that's not a good thing to do.
Well, I have a deeper question, and that is, do you think that things like QAnon are a way? Are you familiar with QAnon?
Yeah, I mean, I know the sort of basic contours of it.
But so, it seems a bit like a reaction to the news and how much, anxiety is, sort of being pushed in the news, and that the world is constantly changing and things are, changing even faster and faster. And that QAnon seems to be a way for a community to kind of join together in a way that makes them feel less alone. So I was curious, as a therapist, it seems like a more global sense of denial. Some people would say, a therapist would probably say it's denial. I would say it's finding truth, but that this is a collective sort of way to deal with the tension and anxieties of our current world.
Yeah, I mean, look, if somebody came to me and said, "Okay, I believe in QAnon," which
I just did,
right? But again, this is not me as a therapist. This is me as a just regular person. But, if I had a client who said, oh, well, I believe in QAnon, I mean, I basically have to sort of
report them, I hope.
You can't judge them. That's called shadow ban. Don't shadow ban us.
I mean, basically, I just say, okay, and I'd want to maybe know more, but my personal beliefs are basically that it's incredibly dangerous. I don't think that that's
Yes.
terrifically controversial. It's also anti-Semitic, from what I understand.
Oh, some of those posts got taken out of context. They're just memes.
What, Nazi propaganda with
I never
Jewish
saw any of
caricatures
those.
is
I
taken
never
out of
saw any of
context?
those.
Okay.
Greg, remind me to go home and delete my feed. That is our tech guy. So, Colette, I want you to tell us a little bit about something you bring up in the article called moral injury, because I think that I actually maybe have experienced this recently, because I actually saw a video that I found quite shocking, even more shocking than I see in the Q boards. And that was a video for something online called the wet ass P word. Now, can the sharing of a shocking video and seeing something like the wet ass P word video?
Is that the Cardi B music video?
Yes, just a pure depravity online for,
What does P stand for?
Well, I can't say. This is a word that you couldn't say earlier.
All right, yeah.
I can't say. Can seeing these sort of videos, do you think this is increasing anxiety and leading to moral injury? And what is moral injury?
So according to the Veterans Administration, for moral injury to occur, then this is a direct quote, that individual must feel like a transgression occurred and that they or someone else crossed a line with respect to their moral beliefs.
Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. They have crossed a line, and now I'm offended. So what would I do?
Wow, little snowflake over here is morally injured.
So again, not as a therapist, but as someone who is studying therapeutics. Have I been morally injured, and how can I recover from seeing this video?
Well, let's see. I mean,
I'm not saying I'm like a vet and I've had that deal of trauma.
Are there moral injury lawyers maybe that you could?
But it will keep me up at night. I'll be laying in bed and I'll be like,
discipline. That's a separate discipline.
For sure.
So you could go that route. You could go the litigious route. You could go the therapeutic route. I mean,
I think I like litigious. I think I do like that.
You like litigious? Okay.
I think I do,
yeah. So I guess you could go and file a lawsuit against these folks.
Class lawsuit, I think. I think I get a lot of people on board with this.
Ben Shapiro.
It really seems to upset some people.
It does.
I've seen people very upset about it.
I've tried to forget about it, but I'll be laying in bed and I'll be like, I got to look up this video again. I got to get up and go look up this video.
Do you deal with feelings of guilt after viewing the video?
Absolutely, yes.
And why do you feel guilty?
I'm not here to be put on trial, okay?
All right, let's get back to the article. You write that in order to create a less traumatized society, we'll have to create a less violent one. But that work will need to be done off the couch. So how do we create a less traumatized society, and why do you hate couches?
Also,
I love couches. I
Seems
just
like
want
you're
to put that
calling
out there.
therapists lazy also.
There is a lot of sitting involved in a lot of cases.
It's hard also to tell what they're doing. The few times I've been to a therapist, I'm not sure what this guy's even doing.
But, if we're really going to create a less traumatized society, what might that look like?
A society that goes to war less, a society that has not only, less war and fewer police and fewer people in prison, but instead is more vibrant, that has a place for everybody to have a dignified life if they want, so like people can have a meaningful job doing any kind of work, whether it could be in any field like science or the arts or
maybe construction. Build back better.
Yeah,
Joe
no,
Biden?
that's right. No, it's right. Construction is really important. I mean, it's how are we going to live anywhere, drive anywhere without construction workers? And even something like restaurant work, or in particular, something like care work, like daycare, teaching, things like that. Like all of these different fields, we could pay people better. We could give people more secure jobs, and we could make it so that people don't have to go into debt to get a good job. And that would overall lead to a decrease in crime at a domestic level and to more social harmony. And then at an international level, we shouldn't be engaging in these imperial projects.
All I hear, Colette, is raise taxes, It seems like a lot of tax money is going to have to use to be able to pull this off.
Well, I think there are two things going on. So first of all, a lot of money could be redirected from the money that we spend on the military and the police. Second, how do you feel about raising taxes on like Jeff Bezos?
I feel terrible about it.
Why do you feel terrible?
Because he's worked so hard. His man went through a divorce, which I've been there, okay? So I can relate to him there. And to be a businessman at the same time, if $1 trillion is what it takes to cure that wound, well, I say we give it to him.
I don't know if it cured that wound.
If you're talking about giving him $1 quadrillion, then I think he's going to have to adopt a couple of other companies to get there. But if that's what it takes, I mean, men who have been hurt have done far worse. Look at Donald Trump. He has been, I will admit this, even as a Trump fan, he was a hurt man, and that pain helped lead him into the White House. But now I knew you were going to try and bring up, and you didn't say it in these so many words, but the defund the police words. So how are we going to do, because we're not in this perfect society yet, but how are we going to...
We will be if Joe Biden wins come November. I just want to put that on the record.
Well, we shall see. We shall see. He still might have a Republican Senate. So if you're going to try and get to the root of absorbing some of this violent trauma from people that are in these positions now, how are we going to be able to afford this expansion of therapy for police officers and veterans by defunding the police and military? That's
I think that they probably would need less therapy if we were not traumatizing people as much, and if we had jobs that provided dignity for people who would otherwise go into these jobs.
Provided dignity, we give them a suit. They get a suit is the dignity.
People go into the military and law enforcement for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is that it's a steady job, and it also provides as a sort of secondary, welfare, but also it provides a sort of sense of purpose and an identity that isn't present at a lot of other jobs. And so, you kind of can't blame people for going into this for a number of reasons. But if we had a society in which people could have any type of job, then I think there would just be, first of all, people wouldn't feel pressured to go into these violent jobs, but also there'd be a lot less crime and violence to begin with, because a lot of crime and violence is rooted in economic insecurity.
So I think this kind of got me thinking about what we were saying earlier about maybe both sides are wrong and that kind of stuff. What do you think of this idea? Let me pitch this to you. If we get rid of wars, then we're going to lose all these jobs, right? So we're going to keep wars to keep all these jobs. So, but we'll have to make them less violent, i.e. drone strikes. So we keep up the wars, but we increase the drone strikes so people are just watching a TV screen and we tell them they're playing a video game. Is that not a compromise?
Well, I think a compromise has to involve all parties. And one of the parties involved that we haven't really talked about is the victims of the drone strikes. And I don't know if they'd be very happy about that.
Well, they're not American citizens, so I'm not sure if they get to vote. I don't know if that's how democracy works until once you make a country a democracy, like we were trying to do in Iraq, then they can have a vote. And then I would be more open to listening to their voice in this, I think.
Did they get to vote? For us, did they get to?
No. They lived under a dictator. They wouldn't have understood the concept of vote. It took a while to get there, I think.
But they did get to vote. I remember the purple fingers. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Tell.
Yeah. 2 years after mission accomplished, they got the right to vote. How fast was that?
But did they get to vote? But did they get to vote for what the U.S. military did there?
No. Why would we get them? Why would we ask them what they thought? What if they said no and they said that we preferred Saddam? Look, I think, you just got to have a few people in the room to make some of these tough decisions. Now, I want to dive into what
doesn't sound like much of a compromise.
No, it does not.
All right, well, here's also a compromise. I think we need to get a military force that is on the QAnon boards, a part of the meme wars. And I think that's a satisfying job. It gets to what you were talking about of a sense of identity, a sense of purpose. And I think sharing memes on behalf of the president is that, and I think it's an untapped market, and I think we should have a new branch of the government to get our military to be posting. If they're already sitting at a computer doing the drone strikes, might as well open up a second window and start sharing Facebook memes.
I mean, from a strategic perspective, I guess that might make sense for...
And less people are hurt. Only people that are being hurt are boomers' brains, maybe.
I think more people are being hurt, though, because a lot of these memes are anti-Semitic or racist, anti-immigrant.
Yes.
Put a trigger warning. We'll put a trigger warning at the top of the post.
I don't think that's going to cut it.
These aren't compromises.
I'm trying to work here. Okay, so I want to quote another piece from your article, Colette, that I think gets into this type of like work and these type of jobs. After police officers and soldiers become traumatized, they can seek out therapy to help them get over their trauma in order to continue their work with minimal psychological damage. In the therapeutic context, it's rarely questioned why such traumatizing work exists in the first place. Now, we want to break the mold of the show here, so I'll go ahead and ask, why do you think such traumatizing work exists? I think we've delved a little bit into this, but if you want to expand on this, as not a therapist, but as a writer and someone who has studied therapy.
So first I want to say that there's a really good book on this by Greg Grandin called The End of Myth. He's a historian at Yale, and he writes about American empire and American history. And basically, The End of Myth is a history of the U.S. border and the U.S. as an imperial project. And essentially, this country, at least from what I read in Grandin's work and other scholars' work, is rooted in this idea that we have no limits. And so, so one of the big causes of the Revolutionary War was actually this edict that the British government put out saying that U.S. colonists couldn't go west of the Alleghenies to settle. And what that was it was a peace treaty with the indigenous peoples in that area. And then Americans basically said, Dad, you can't tell me what to do. And they just went and did it anyway. And they just went and they committed massacres of these people that they had been explicitly legally barred from engaging in wars with. And that was the start of our country. And it really set the tone for how things went.
So it's in our DNA, kind of, you might say.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's in our DNA, but it's certainly in our national origin story. Yeah. And so, and a lot of what Grandin talks about in this book is that throughout our history, we've been defined by this urge to defy limits and defy orders and to just expand and expand and expand, no matter whether that's Western expansion and the genocide of all the indigenous peoples in the West. In 1898, the border was sort of the West was considered one, or I'm sorry, I believe it was 1890, the West was considered one.
Yeah,
and
Manifest Destiny was done.
Yeah, it was over. We did it. And then in 1898, we just, found ourselves in the Spanish-American War. We just stumbled in. We always seem to be, I love this thing where we always seem to be stumbling into wars. Like we just sort of end up there by accident. But so we ended up engaging in this imperial project in the Philippines. And then after World War II, we are the global hegemon by default. And we just sort of, we use the Cold War as an excuse to expand and engage in all of these proxy wars in Central America and Asia and Africa and in Europe as well. And so we kept doing this. And when it came time to declare war in Afghanistan and Iraq in the early 2000s, it really wasn't that surprising because it was just keeping with a pattern of behavior that we've been doing since the beginning.
It's even kind of, going back farther than that. There's an old saying about the Roman Empire, they created a desert and called it peace.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I think that there's definitely something to say about the historical precedent caused by...
Well, we talk a lot about order, like global order, how America is an arbiter of global order. And I think that that's a problem, because what does order look like? If order looks like death squads in El Salvador, that doesn't sound very good to me.
Right. Or worse yet, Kyle Rittenhouse.
Right. Yeah, well, exactly. If it's just murdering people in the street, that doesn't sound good.
I don't think
not
that's
an order I believe in.
Law, but is it about law? About having rules and staying by those rules?
Definitely not, because we break the rules. We only care about rules in as much as they further our own goals. We never sign the treaties that we make everybody else sign.
Well, we don't have to. We are different. If any other country used a nuclear weapon, they would have used it for bad. With the what? The bully? No. We are the good guy. We're like the strong football player who sees someone being bullied, in Vietnam, and then comes in and goes, "Hey, stop the bullying here,"
and then beats up both of them.
Hey, look, we just gotta go in there and we gotta start swinging.
Just not caring.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be there if we didn't care. We wouldn't be there at all.
Sounds like Ralph needs some therapy,
too much.
actually.
Really, I think America cares too much. I think it's kind of what we're getting at, right? They keep getting involved and finding themselves in all these situations by staying, caring and staying true to their nature, which I think is kind of what we're hinting at here, right?
Yeah, it just happens. It's just an accident.
But so there is a feeling, I guess, like from your article, that by starting to address and like reflect, which I think is sort of starting to happen now with people being more aware of PTSD coming from these certain types of jobs, that we'll be able to confront this more publicly, correct? Not just
I hope so. I think it would be good for everyone if we could have an honest conversation about what's going on and why it's going on.
What if we were doing that and then China and Russia teamed up and attacked us on a front line, and then we were too in touch with our feelings to be able to fight back?
Well, I think that's jumping to conclusions a little bit.
That's go back into
therapist mode.
Okay.
He does jump to
I have a lot of issues that I'm working through, and I'll be honest, and a lot of it has to do with my ex-wife and her new man, Ted.
Yeah, it sounds like you're projecting a bit.
Yeah, he definitely is. Well, that's about all we have for today. We want to thank you so much for joining us, Colette. And again, that article is Treating American Empire on thebaffler.com. Where can our listeners find more about you and your work?
So I'm on Twitter at Ms. Shade, MSSHADE.
Oh, that's a great name.
Thank you. That's just Shade. My name.
Right, I know, but the Twitter name too. It's just, I'm surprised you got that in time. I think somebody might have taken it.
I've been on it too long.
So I think we can agree, Colette, that America, after just a few therapy sessions, will be all better and be able to move on and be healthy.
I think that we can't expect a quick fix.
Well, I want to ask you one last question. Now, there's been a lot of therapists that have spoken up trying to, I don't know what the word is, but give their, analysis on Trump's mental well-being.
I just guessed that that's where this was going to go.
This was going to go?
Yeah.
Well, I bet you didn't see this one coming. Now, how do you think he's holding up with all of the pressure that's been put on him? How fake news treats him every day. I think he's holding up very, very well.
I don't have much of a baseline for him.
A lesser person would be crying at those press briefings, right? The fact that he's not in tears every day, I go, that's my president. That's the bar. That's where I keep, that's the bar. And I bet you Joe Biden year 2, I bet he's going to cry. And is that good or is that bad? I don't know. Colette, you tell me. You're a therapist.
It's neither.
I thought it was good, though. I mean,
maybe we're all wrong.
It's a good release. I guess, yeah, we are both wrong. She's right.
I mean, crying can be healthy. Crying can be healthy, and you shouldn't repress it.
Okay, even if it's late at night and then when I'm watching the Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion video, Wet Ass P.
Or the DNC fight song music video.
You're clearly both having very strong reactions to these videos.
We are.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Glad, thank you for being here.
For joining us.